All right, ladies and gentlemen, fellas, we're here. We're talking about some final picks with Mr. Dylan Bird himself. We'll get to that lovely man in a second on vacation down in Florida. Might actually, I thought he was going to maybe step in for the Brooks Koepkas of the world in there, step in for some of the people. What is it, Danny Willett? That ended up, I thought we might see Dylan Bird's name on that. But yeah, we're here. We're going to break it down. Really, not so much go into a breakdown of this again. Like we've already done that. We've each done that. Dylan on his channel. I've done that on my channel. But more so talk about kind of just the game theory of it. The whole time we'll be answering questions where they make sense to kind of answer and fit in. Game theory, ownership, where that's at right now. Talk through some other things as well. But yeah, I guess I'll introduce Dylan with asking him. He's down in Florida. He's playing some golf. We're at this week, the Players, right? We're at Sawgrass, where I'm sure you've heard if you listen to any content, people talking about how crazy it's going to be with water and all that stuff. Mr. Dylan Bird, you have any stories for us, whether being down there or just in general with yourself, golfing and water involved?
Yeah, so what's up, Sal? First of all, happy to be here. Players Championship week. We got March Madness next week. Great time in sports. But yeah, I am in Florida right now, Boca Raton. Went golfing the other day. Got used to this Bermuda grass down here in Florida. First time on the course all year. And let's just say the water is a bitch. Literally, and that's just the way Florida golf is. Water is in play on every single hole pretty much at the Players. And I'm playing golf the other day, and hole one, I crushed my first drive, went a little bit left, but I'm used to playing in New York, used to playing, Bethpage, not Bethpage Black, but Bethpage. They have other, courses out there in that complex if you're unaware of that. So used to playing Bethpage where you hit it off the fairway and it doesn't matter. I hit my ball a little bit left, but it was crushed. I cleared a big bush on the left side, and I'm like, all right, I should be fine. And we get all the way up.
You're on a journey here.
We get all the way up there, and then there is a huge lake right behind this bush. And it turned out that the lake turned into like a stream that went across the fairway that we were not even able to see. So even if I hit my drive straight, it probably would have been the stream. Bottom line, water is going to be tough this week, and staying out of the water is going to be a major key.
Amateur golfer himself, Dylan Bird, with the report on the grounds in Florida. Yeah, man, I don't think I've had – look, last year was like the first year that I actually started to try to learn the game of golf, being a turf major, having free access to golf courses for a few years in college and never even took advantage of it, just like the idea of working on the golf courses. I went golfing twice last year, first time ever since being like a kid. And yeah, it was brutal. But the one time you had to drive it about 150 yards over just a huge pond, and at least 150 yards, probably like 160, 165. And I stood no chance. Like at that point, just hitting the ball was like a success for me. Anything with a hazard in front. I brought 24 balls that day. I gave it a good half dozen try on that hole. Lost them all and was like, I'm just going to move on. I'm just going to play captain and crew or just best ball on this one. But yeah, we're here. We got this. We got a lot of hazards. Like we said, it's going to be, I'm going to be looking at approach, tee to green, accuracy, all those types of things. Fairways gained is something that I know Dylan was talking about in one of his videos. It's all those things are going to be important, but it's all over the place at the end of the day. So, I mean, playing the ownership game, we'll talk about that throughout this. But I think the spot to start is we have a 9 and an 8K range that are absolutely loaded, like way more loaded than you're ever going to be finding because of just this major-esque field, right? Your fifth major here. So I think I want to get your initial thoughts on that range. Let's do it without ownership to begin. Like where are the guys? How are you weeding out the 9 and the 8K range? We can touch on the 10K range in a second, but that 9 and 8K range, what is your initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, so taking out ownership, honestly, it's mid-Wednesday here, and I'm honestly still not completely sure which way I'm going to go strongly because there are just so many guys I like. Justin Thomas at the top of the 9K range here. I'm a huge fan of him. Now, obviously, I mentioned that water is going to be important. Fairways gains are going to be important. He's been horrible off the tee lately. He's actually ranks over the last 24 rounds. He's ranking 143rd in the field on fairways gain. That's pretty brutal. That being said, it's Justin Thomas. I don't expect his driving drought to last, so long, and his irons are just so good. So yeah, I do like Justin Thomas this week. I bet him at 20-1. We'll get into that later in the show. Also, Webb Simpson, a former winner here, a guy. Anytime you get a shorter course where irons are very important, Webb Simpson, it's his bread and butter for that. So I like Webb Simpson at 9.5. Colin Morikawa, another guy who you could expect his approach is going to be lights out, 9.4. Victor Hovland is a little bit interesting. Now, I don't want to talk completely about ownership here, but you will get a ownership discount a little bit with him. Hovland's been really, really good, except for 1 round last week at the Arnold Palmer. He completely botched. I believe it was on Sunday. He was like, I was on the golf course and I'm checking my phone. He's like,
he exploded the entire weekend.
7 over through 6 or something. I don't expect that to happen again. Hovland is still a rock solid golfer. And then Patrick Cantley at 9-2. All these guys, I think, you can't go wrong with.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up right now, basically. What you're seeing here from these price ranges, I could zoom in so we can hop into those specific ranges. But yeah, it's interesting because like right away, the name that you see is kind of like that sticker shock of Justin Thomas in the 9K range. But I mean, what is he? Like if he's $200 more, it's like not that big of a difference. Bryson is the one that just stands out. And this is why I just updated ownership before the show. Bryson's right now the highest projected owned guy that I have projected for. And it makes sense. Like right when you see this, he comes out as a basically a co-favorite at points during this week, 12-1 on some sites, bet down to 10-1 on some other sites for momentarily. But yeah, he ends up winning last week. He goes to a course where clear advantages just over the water and things like that, carrying it 370 yards, but not one where people just expected him to just go out there and win. So now it's the narrative's back where he can win anywhere. The approach play, none of that really matters. There's the whole side of it of accuracy that can be an issue here for Bryson, but when he's down in this $9,700 range as at this point, somebody who's a clear, I would say $10,000 player, that's going to stand out. But yeah, man, this range is just loaded with guys. I would say where my eyes went first is probably Colin Morikawa at $9,400. It's just, I don't really care what the ownership is on him. I wanted to bet him again this week. I didn't because in this range, I took JT at 20-1. Morikawa was already 22-1, 20-1 in most spots. And that was even on like early Monday. When I was trying to look, that's where he opened. So I think that's a fine number. I don't think he's being overvalued, but it's just tough to get anything off the bone on that one where I think you're kind of getting a dip on JT. But yeah, Morikawa, you're getting a top 5 ranked player in the world that sets up what you kind of want here. If you can picture something that you want here, right? You want putting, but outside of that, we have to just get variant with that. You basically want the guy who's going to have irons. You basically want the guy who's going to be accurate and also carry with that some pedigree in terms of winning down the stretch. And he's been able to chase down guys like JT and win and things like that. So yeah, Morikawa at 9,400, probably where my eyes went first. But if you go to this 8K range here, like this 8K range is almost just as nuts. Hatton was the big baffling point to me when I saw him here. I think I tweeted it out like right away in the week, not only in the betting markets, but in general, Hatton's the guy who out like Bryson in that 9K range is going to pick up ownership. Hatton down in this range. Outside of like Hatton, was there anything else that in this range kind of stood out to you? You're starting to get to, I would say, not as elite of players compared to that 9K range, but still some nicely priced guys.
Yeah, honestly, I have almost every guy started in this range as a potential play. But if I'm singling out guys that I really like in this 8K range, I think Haddon is certainly one of them. I was not on Haddon because, as you know, not a huge Haddon fan. And last week, I texted you early in the week, Thursday. I was like, oh, he's done already. And then, all of a sudden the weekend comes and the guy just is lights out. The reason why he, was so bad on Thursdays, he lost like 4.4 strokes putting in that Thursday round. That's very unlike Haddon. He's usually not a bad putter. So I think that all things considered, I mean, this is a guy whose approach is going to be really good. So I do like Haddon this week. Now, speaking of other guys, I do like Hideki and Jordan Spieth also at 8-7 and 8-6 here. Hideki Matsuyama, a guy who is playing a lot better recently. I've been kind of like not really paying attention to him at all because he just hasn't been good for what seems like a really long time now. But the last few rounds, Hideki Matsuyama has been pretty rock solid. Finished top 20 in both of the last 2 tournaments he's played. Also has a few key stats for him that I really like this week. He ranks 14th in the field in strokes gained par 5s. He ranks 14th in that over the last 24 rounds. And he ranks 4th in proximity 125 to 150 over his last 24 rounds. That's going to be an important stat this week because that's the second most common approach shot this week. Wedges will be important. It's not that long of a course. So yeah, I do like Hideki. And then Spieth, I mean, the guy's been top 15 in his last 4 tournaments. He has 3 top 5s out of his last 4. And meanwhile, he's still coming in pretty under-owned. I know that Jordan Spieth has missed the cut in 4 of his last 5 appearances here. But the truth is that he's playing, so well, and he figured it out at Arnold Palmer with all the water. Why can't he figure it out again with all the water at TPC Sawgrass?
Yeah, I think Spieth was somebody like during the video that I did earlier this week, just like kind of breaking it down, like going through Spieth, I was like, all right, like any complete non-interest in Spieth at this point, like especially when he is now, I mean, relatively cheap for how he's been playing, is just more so like preconceived notions of a month ago and prior to that. Just the way that he's playing right now with his irons, 14 out of his last 16 rounds, he's gained with his irons. He's been phenomenal there. And same exact things happening off the tee. Like when he was absolutely dominating back in the day, winning nonstop, you're always going to have that putter. You're going to have these insane holes that he can put together. But a lot of that stems from the ball striking ability, especially when it's accurate, which if you're going to have that, you're going to have a leg up at this type of a track. So, yeah, I would say that looks good for Spieth. Closing on Hideki. Hideki's not somebody I have much interest in today just from a lack of being able to get to everybody or interest in tomorrow. But the thing that's interesting about Hideki is like this is a guy that you were praying can get the putter going for one round a month. And now he's kind of been there for like 3 straight weeks. He lost strokes at the WGC, but he's basically a net neutral against a tough field. But Arnold Palmer, he's gaining strokes. He's gaining significant strokes, even though he missed a cut at the Genesis. So that's something that usually kept me off Hideki was like everything can go right for the guy. But he can't get there when it comes to putting ever in the short game when it comes to his around the green play. Those things have been things that are kind of turning around lately in some major ways. So it is appealing to watch, especially of the narrative of him first round leading, shooting the course record here last year. So yeah, I think how I would rank it right now, and we can go before ownership and then we can discuss kind of ownership in this range right after this. But in terms of my interest in these ranges, if I had to pick 3 guys, I would probably go with Morikawa, Hatton, and JT, and that's going to be chalk, but that'll be before we talk about ownership. What about for you?
Yeah, so I think that we're going to talk about lineup construction, but I think you could fit 2-3 of these 9K guys in, and I already started looking at some lineup potential, possibly playing JT, Webb, and Colin, all 3 of them, and then moving down to the low 7s or high 6s. So I do like those 3 guys as, from this 9K range, the 3 guys I like the most are JT, Webb, and Morikawa. If we had to move down to the 8K range, I'm really leaning towards playing Spieth. I mean, I know the course history is bad, but how could you go away from that ownership discount if his approach is that, that good, and the putter obviously could get hot at any time where he's dropping everything from 40 feet, 50 feet. So I think Spieth has, a lot of upside.
Yeah, I was expecting to see Spieth more expensive. So right now, the way that ownership is carrying out, and you can check all ownership projections. We actually have an optimizer now down below on Patreon as well, all that type of stuff. Patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_. The optimizer includes the ownership and all that. Right now, the top 4 highest projected guys that I have ownership on are all in that 9K range. And right now, I do think Hatton will probably come up a little bit when I run a final crunch today. He's still like covering around 15%. I think that can probably hit up above 20. But it's Bryson, Cantley, Finau, and JT all above 20% right now. Some guys flirting with 20%, but that's how loaded that range is. And then you're going to get guys mixed in from the 10K, the 8K, maybe a couple guys here or there in the 7K range. So yeah, I mean, when I start to factor that ownership in, it starts to make some guys look a little bit less appealing, like a JT who's had the driving issues lately, although I think they can click back. Is this something that, in his personal life, losing his grandpa, I think it was 2.5 weeks ago now at this point, who is somebody that's very close to him, if correlating to the play that he's had at this point, there could be something to that. Gets back to a place where he's had some success, though. So JT, with that ownership coming in on him, when there's guys like Morikawa at this point, who I currently have coming in at, 10% less, 8% less owned as JT, that's where I start to lean a little bit more. And then, yeah, you have guys in this range. Cantley's picking up a lot of ownership, like I said, 24%. You have guys in this range who are kind of going under the radar, like you talked about, with a Victor Hovland, who's like barely cracking 10%. I have him at 12% projected ownership. He basically had probably the five straight best rounds out of anybody the last 2 weeks, from Friday to Friday, basically Friday to Friday. And then he falls apart on the weekend, falls apart Thursday to start that WGC off. And now he's kind of being forgotten. So I think once you start to get this ownership involved, it's going to be completely different. And the thing I want to touch on with ownership, because we jumped right to this range where there's a lot of debate this week, a lot of stuff going on, is the 10K plus range of no more Brooks, but DJ, Rahm, Rory, and Xander. And in this range up here, you're basically getting like all these guys who are 10K plus are going to pick up ownership. Rahm around 15%. I think that Rory and DJ start to push. I have them both around 18%, start to push 20%. But you have a guy who's never low owned in Xander right now. I'm projecting him for about 11% ownership. I am very tempted, especially when you factor in that Justin Thomas, Bryson right there next to him with high ownership. Xander, like the only guy in that range at all. I'm very tempted to just start my lineup with Xander. As much as it doesn't like look great, he's probably slightly overpriced here relative to guys below him. I'm very tempted to start with Xander and then just pile on to some other things. Do you have any takes on the 10K range and kind of where Xander's being forgotten for good reason, but game theory wise could be an edge?
Yeah, so quick before I talk about the 10K range, you mentioned that Hovland had a really, really insane stretch. This weekend, starting on Saturday, it was the first round that he lost. It was the first round that he lost strokes total since January 28th at the Farmers. He went 13 straight rounds gaining strokes, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, I mean, look, I wouldn't overanalyze that. I don't think that's a big deal. But going back to the 10K range here, I've had the same take that since the beginning of the week, and I'm going to stick to it. I'm likely leaning towards fading the 10K range entirely. I just don't think any of the guys up there, and I think, look, this could be just like my bias right now. The fact that, look, none of these guys are really coming off impressive performances at all. They're kind of all coming in like low for what their standards are. That being said, I never usually like Xander. But I did mention that if I'm going to dip into the 10K range, it's probably going to be Xander at 10-3 with that low ownership. You never see low ownership on Xander. Obviously, he's like pretty rock solid across the board everywhere. So I think that Xander is the play if you go to the 10K range. Personally, I like playing Dustin Johnson and John Rahm when it's like a harder course where I feel like most people are going to have to grind it out. Most people are going to struggle. This, I don't really feel that way unless for whatever reason the course plays hard. And then Rory, obviously Rory won in 2019. I'm okay with Rory, but I just would rather get to guys in the 9K range. I would rather take the price discount for guys who I think are equal golfers at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the guy in this range, all things considered, is probably for me John Rahm, but that ownership right now on Xander is pretty appealing. Rahm not picking up all that much ownership, but usually a guy who starts to gain steam a little bit on later in the week. Any of these guys up top, once people can actually look into it more, identify some value. But yeah, I think that that's pretty appealing. Let's actually talk quickly just about general ownership right now on this. Is there anybody, so if you have any ownership, I don't know if you have my ownership or a Fantasy National, whatever, pulled up right now. Do you have anything pulled up?
Yeah, I have Fantasy National pulled up. I would pull up yours right now, but I feel like the stream will lag if I open it up. So,
oh yeah, working off my man on vacation, working off the one screen right now, grinding out there. It's like once I went from one screen to, I have three screens, but yeah, if I open up the third one, it usually lags when I'm live streaming. Right. I got to get off a laptop. Any tech support guys in the chat right now? Let's actually see who's in the chat right now. But yeah, once I went down to two screens, like anytime I have to use one screen, if I'm going home or anything, it's like the worst possible situation. Oh, look at this. We got some compliments. Bryce Cunningham, hell of a shirt. There, Sal. Thanks, man. Yeah, I just I haven't taken this shirt off. I've just basically been wearing it everywhere since I got it like 2 days ago. I'm trying to redo the whole wardrobe because I realized I want to just one for content, like look more professional on camera, because most of the times I'm getting up at like 5 a.m. and shooting a video and I just have a fucking hoodie on because I'm cold or something. I'm like, hey, you know what? If you take a couple extra seconds of your time to like put something nice on, you know, maybe shower before you do these videos early in the morning, maybe that'll catch like somebody from a network's eye to not work for them, but do some collabs with them. So yeah, we're trying to do that. And honestly, this is a nice shirt, but it's got fucking TJ Maxx. It was like $8. It's good shit out there in these streets. So we got Steven says, nice blouse, Sal. Yeah, what you don't know is I currently have 0 pants on. 0 pairs of pants are currently being worn.
It's Players Championship colors. It fits the molds here.
Is it really? Is it really the colors? There we go.
Yeah, it's golden navy. Yeah.
Hell yeah. What's going on? Oh yeah, you're right. I remember last year seeing the app, which that's actually something we should touch on in a second in terms of our like expectations for the app this year. But we got Jeremy in the chat saying, boys, what's going on? We got Peter asking me for some AMC takes. I have absolutely 0 takes on it. To be completely honest, I'm not in that sphere. And we got Eric. We got people in the chat right now. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, just let us know. We're going to go through some 7K range, of course, 6K range, general kind of lineup construction that we're dealing with. I haven't built any of my single entry 3 max. My single entry is in 3 max, but mainly my single entry is where a lot of my exposure will get down. I'm really interested in trying to get different up top, but it seems like right now you kind of naturally can with some of these guys that we were talking about, even though a lot of them are going to be picking up ownership, which just makes that 7K range kind of bare. Before we get into that though, I'll quickly touch on the sponsor of the show, who's going to be a new sponsor. We actually started this All-Star weekend, and I was looking for a place to put a wager on from like a fantasy perspective, the 3-point contest and like the dunk contest and things like that. I was curious if anywhere out there had that, because I think there's more of an edge there than like the betting markets where it's kind of just a toss up. So right now the sponsor of the show is going to be, let me pull this up. It's going to be Prize Picks. So Prize Picks is interesting because it's fantasy related, just scoring. So like right now in terms of where my fantasy points are coming in on a lot of these guys, it's a little bit different of a scoring format than DraftKings, but I'm still over, even when I taken that into account, over on a decent amount of these guys, which is usually like the trick. They're not obviously all going to be finishing higher than each other because they cut into each other. So basically what you do is you can just combine some of these guys together. If you want to use the code SAL, you'll get a 100% match up to $100, which normally it's like 50% match or $50. So we try to push for the 100% match up to $100 Rooskies. You can use that code SAL down below. But basically, like where I'm standing at right now is guys up top. It's similar. It's interesting because if you can see this, a lot of these guys have similar fantasy scoring outputs, which is based on Vegas odds, based on a lot of things like their skill sets that you're going to project for. It's usually not the case that that's going to be happening, that you have guys like Sergio projected for the same amount of points on an over-under than like a Xander or a Cantley. So like for me right now, it's pretty clear that guys like Justin Thomas are completely underpriced in this format. Guys like Rory are completely underpriced in this format. And they're kind of just setting it up this week, I think, as a promotion for the players to get more people involved on it. That's setting these guys like the exact same fantasy scoring production. So you're getting guys like Louis and Harris English basically projecting out as like the same players as Rory and JT, which is clearly not the case. So if you want to try it out, I don't think they're always going to have it set up this way, but it's set up this way. You can see right here, set up the scoring system for the PGA. So players this week. So it's something to be checking out. You can check it out down below. Really, I mean, any of these guys who you know their names, I would be taking the over on compared to the guys who have the exact same scoring related to them. But you can check that out down below. So we can get into this 7K range now. And I want to get your opinion quickly. Last year for the players, obviously it got canceled after one round. I don't know if you got to experience the app side of it, just being able to see like every single shot of every single guy. I'm not sure if you used the app last year for that one round. There was clearly a lot of things going on in the world during this time last year. Did you get to use the players app last year?
Yeah, I don't remember because all I remember was that I was in Nashville with my friends and then everything shut down when we were in Nashville. So like I obviously was following the players, but I don't remember if I downloaded the app. But that being said, the Masters had something similar to that this year, right? Where you're able to see every shot of every player.
Yeah, and that's like with the players one round last year, they had some technical difficulties, like while it was up and stuff. There was, a lot of upside to it. Obviously with COVID, like in the full on spread and break during that, there's some things that didn't go as planned for their broadcast, but I thought it was very encouraging. I thought it was very cool. They were like the first ones to guarantee and promise every shot last year. I think there's a lot of upside to that. So I'm going to be watching. I don't have Peacock, but I think it's free, so I might sign up and check out that like betting only stream. If they're going to be having a lot more camera angles, I'm curious if that'll kind of cross over into, I think it was NBC that's doing that. So yeah, I think clearly lots of upside from that. That's like the biggest thing, but also the last thing needed for something like golf to not hit the same mainstream levels as NFL, because we just like seeing people hit each other, like dating back to like the Coliseum times. But just in terms of being able to actually watch the game, the betting side of it, like take on handles, viewership from like our standpoint, just the overall game of golf is going to go to an insanely different level. So I'm curious to see, once people can actually see every shot this week, I'm going to be watching closely, just kind of even just like searching hashtags on Twitter, like the overall sentiment of it, as people who would never even watch the game can kind of get exposed to it, especially from like a betting standpoint as more majors start to come up. We have a question from Steven. He says, you confident on Thomas? Is it more numbers and less own percentage because he's not been playing well? I don't think. How much recent play do you involve in your decisions? Thanks always. Yeah, man. So the recent form, I there's not like a number that I have in like the stuff that I do that says recent form or like a variable, but what it basically takes into account is the time frame that you're looking at. So if you want to know exactly like how I take it into account, you want to kind of scale it. So the amount of rounds you play is going to be a variable. So you might have 150 rounds in your database for a golfer's projection, right? And you're going to weight that. So like the last 10 rounds, yeah, I think that the last 10 rounds are going to be pretty important, but how much do I think it is important compared to the last 50 rounds? So that longer form is going to give you a base, and then it's going to move one way or another over the last couple of rounds. Just it being these past events, it's not really going to change it that much. I'll be completely honest with you. Just it being these two last rounds, and really in there, it's like 3 to 5 bad holes, which is really starting to eject him. So it's not something that's going to be changing it all that much for me. So it's not a name. It's just the skill set of a guy who for 3 years has been, and really 2 years now, like a mega elite after coming off of 2 bad weeks. So that's kind of like how I decide on it. I do obviously look at the recent events from like a coming up with narratives in my head standpoint, but at the end of the day, that's how it kind of goes from the data side of it. Do you have any stances on just JT in general based on like the recent form? How, I guess overall the general question is like you weighting recent form versus the long-term form of a player. When do you think it's like a worry sign to maybe jump off?
The thing is that like with Justin Thomas, like what he is. He honestly, like before this span, he's like the most consistent golfer on tour. Like you would never have to worry about him normally like missing a cut, which is why, I mean, I'm not ready to jump off the train yet. Obviously, I like Justin Thomas a lot. If he has another bad driving week this week, then I think it's probably a little bit worrisome because then it'll be 4 tournaments in a row. If he has last week you did, not last week, or he wasn't in last week, but the last tournament he played in, he had a really bad Thursday, but then he kind of picked it up a little bit towards the end. So I'm not overly worried with it yet. But if he has one or two more tournaments where it gets to like 4 or 5 in a row, then I start to get worried.
Yeah, and then the other side of it is also it's just outliers paired together, right? It's not so for somebody who's not like creating projections and it's not a psychopath like myself. Like the way to look at it is you can go to any source that has strokes gained data. He had I think it was the second worst putting round of his entire career, at least that we have data on, which is nothing overseas. So in American soil on the PGA Tour, second worst putting round of his career 2 weeks ago. Then he has the worst off the tee driving round last week, or the last time that we saw him. So that's just 2 outliers in a row. When you're looking at it, just look at how he's kind of missing cuts and how he's performing poorly. When it's just a really bad putting round, I mean, DJ just lost 10 strokes putting. Nobody's jumping up and down that DJ shouldn't be either the favorite in this or just nobody's really having concerns about getting to DJ, right? So the irons have still been fine. He just gained 9.5 strokes with the irons. The tee to green has still been fine. So I think, one, it's just short form, but once you start to see guys like, Gary Woodland because of injuries, or just guys like Doc Redman just kind of lose their game, when you're seeing them lose strokes everywhere, like the putter is broken, the irons are broken, the drive, like there's nothing to bail them out. Right now, what you're getting from Justin Thomas is maybe if you wanted to say that the driver so far this year hasn't been great, but everything else is still there. So you just need one thing to click for him instead of everything for some of those other guys who are struggling. So yeah, I think that pretty much nails it home. And yeah, no problem, Stephen. Good question. I think that's overall, those types of questions are probably pretty important for people just to kind of differentiate when they're trying to pick some guys who might be both struggling lately, how to decide which ones might be coming back and firing back soon. Things like iron play sticking more than putting in long-term form versus short-term form. So we can hit the 7K range now and talk about kind of ownership as we go through this. The highest guy that I have currently projected for ownership in the 7K range, it's going to be Abraham Answer, and it's pretty significant over anybody else. Like Neiman's picking up some ownership for me. Neiman and Answer are probably the 2 highest by the end of the week. Zalatoris will be in that mix as well, but I think he'll kind of get phased out a little bit. So clearly that Neiman is underpriced in this range. Once the ownership starts to come in, for me, it's a range where I'm like, I really don't need to be playing a highly owned 7K range golfer. So guys like Neiman and Answer, 150 lineup max, yeah, I'll have some, but when it comes down to my final lineup, they're not going to be in it. Like I already know that at this point, if there's a range I need to get different, it's the 7K range. What is your first thoughts on it? I believe that you like Neiman from something that I saw on Twitter. At least you like the idea of Neiman before ownership. What do you think right now?
Yeah. So, first I want to start with Answer. Honestly, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that ownership that Answer's picking up. I did not expect that. Usually he was popular.
It's our boy, Mr. Pat Mayo. I listen to anytime that. I don't always have time to listen to like everybody's podcast during the week. But anytime that Rick Mayo and then Raza from Awesome will get on a show together, usually for these majors, but they got on one for the players. And I listened, I think it was like a half hour worth, and I heard Answer's name, I think, more than anybody else. That there's definitely something to that. Yeah, we got Scott in the chat, the Mayo effect. Good old Pat, friend of the program.
Yeah, but Answer, he was popular over the summer, but he hasn't been that consistent lately. His last 4 events, he's missed the cut in 2 of them. Now, granted, he finished 18th and 5th in the ones that he actually made the cut. So obviously there's high upside there, but I don't, especially with the high ownership, I don't see myself getting the Answer. He's not playing that well that I have to get to him. And then in terms of Neiman, yeah, I love Neiman. I normally always play him. And I know you said you saw a tweet. Yeah, I tweeted because DraftKings needs to actually price this guy up. I mean, this is ridiculous at this point. How many tournaments is the guy going to play well and that they're going to still price him in the 7K range? I think Neiman's the breakout guy this year. Like, I think he's going to win tournaments. He's going to have a great year. But anyway, still
passionate about this. I saw the anger coming out on your face there.
No, I love Neiman. I'm a huge fan of him. I just wish I could get him into the lineup. And now I'm hesitating because there's a lot of other guys that are just not picking up the ownership. But right. I think I did listen to the same show as you, Mayo, Rasa, and Rick. And I think they made a great point about Neiman, and they all pretty much agreed on this, is that, yeah, the idea of Neiman is great this week, but in a tournament that's just so random where you don't know what's going to happen, guys who you don't expect miss the cut all the time. Obviously, it's top 65 in ties, and there's 154 people in the field. I'm in no rush to get to a guy like Neiman, who is going to pick up so much ownership when you could just go to Louis Oosthuizen or any of these other guys who are going to pick up half as much ownership, but have just as much of a chance to make the cut, if not play well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me is just the ownership difference. Like I had no interest in I would honestly say either of them this week. I guess Neiman's name in this range does stand out as a guy who in less strong fields or weaker fields is the better way to say that comes in at like 8,500, 8,800, maybe even touches 9K in some of those fields. But it's tough when you can get guys. I mean, half the ownership of a Sam Burns, who everybody loved last week. Even Corey Connors, for me, is at 8.7% projected ownership right now. I mean, he's going to be coming in lower after what he did last week and how consistent I mean, 2 weeks ago, he ends up losing 3 strokes with a putter. But outside of that, how consistent this year his short game has been, which is something you don't normally say with Corey Connors. Yeah, somebody in the chat says, Russell Henley is who they have their eye on. Yeah, Henley's another guy who, if you're trying to see how he sets up, just accurate all the way in control and dialed in with his irons, that's somebody who stands out as well. So yeah, I'm kind of just going to anybody else in this range. The guy that I probably like the most in this range, though, is Sam Burns, and he is picking up ownership. I didn't think it would be as much as it is, but it's like 6-7%, so it's nothing that keeps me off of him. It's the whole flop flag narrative. So Burns comes in, he ends up putting up a stinker last week, but it wasn't anything crazy. Like he's losing like a half a stroke in each department. When you're facing a tougher field and you just don't play well, that's what's going to happen. But he didn't eject himself. He just basically got played better than in almost every single category, but nothing catastrophic there. I wasn't scared about iron play falling off or anything like that. And now he's coming in at a crazy reduced price point. Makes sense in this field. And just nowhere near the same amount of love. So I took him as an outright at 125 to 1. You said you saw him at FanDuel at 160 to 1, which I didn't have access to, sadly, but got him at 125 to 1. He's probably my favorite 7K play. He is the Corey Connors of this week. Corey Connors 2 events ago messes up. Everybody has high ownership on him, doesn't do anything. Nobody wants to play him the next week, or half the amount of people want to play him. He goes out there, he's a top 3. I don't think I hope that same result happens. I'm not projecting that same result to happen, but it's the same narrative in terms of everybody loved this guy a week ago. Nothing has really changed in his game. Yes, he's in a tougher field now, but you're getting lower price on that. So I think Sam Burns is probably my favorite play out of a loaded 7K range. I'll talk about another guy in a second, but any thoughts on Sam Burns or any of these other guys in this like mid 7K range?
Yeah, Sam Burns, he killed me last week, 75. I owned him in 3 out of my 4 lineups that I played, and obviously he botched, but it was really only one bad round. And, you got to put that stuff past you. Guys are going to have one bad round. Not everyone is Victor Hovland, who could play 13 great rounds in a row. And even Victor Hovland obviously just played 2 bad rounds over the weekend. It's going to happen. That's the sport of golf. So I like Sam Burns this week. I think that he could play really, really well. Obviously was playing great. And I feel like a win is going to come from him. I mean, he's been like right there so many times and kind of just like played decently on Sunday, and, other guys, passed him. I like Burns a lot. One other guy I want to mention in this range who I don't know how he continues to go overlooked every single week is Max Homa at 7.6. Yes. He ranks 4th in my model this week. He ranks 1st in strokes gained par 5 over the last 24 rounds, 7th proximity, 200 plus. He's killing it with approach, like pretty much every approach, that 14th in strokes gained general approach over the last 24. And meanwhile, he's still coming in low ownership. On Fantasy National here, they're projecting him at 8.7%. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be higher. I don't know what you have, whether you have higher or lower than that.
I have Homa. I have him at 6.8% right now. Homa grades out for me as my 9th overall play. So assuming that I am going to go forward and just kind of fade guys like Answer and Neiman in this range because of ownership, Homa would be my 4th highest owned guy in the 7K range right now.
Yeah,
for me personally, ownership-wise, he's low.
I don't understand, but I don't understand why he keeps coming in low. But I'm going to take advantage of that, and I'll play Max Homa at 7.6 for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of the forgotten man thing, right? Like the price point's kind of dropped a little bit. He wins, and then a couple weeks go by, and then there's just guys around him that it's kind of it's the opposite of what the NFL is right now. Like the NFL is, when you play NFL DFS, it's a little bit clearly saturated, a lot of casual money in there. But now it's starting to get sharper to where if a guy goes off the week before, people don't really care to play him the next week as much, or at least it doesn't stick as much. It's not 100% there in golf, but you see that happening more often, to where when Corey Connors goes off last week, now he's 10% owned instead of normally like 5% owned. So Homa finishes like 10th, continues to finish top 20 everywhere. But it's not winning the tournament or finishing top 5 or contending on the weekend like a Connors was last week or some of these other guys. So you're just not seeing the ownership follow through. But yeah, Homa's somebody that I really like as well in the range. I think he was going to be one of the guys I mentioned. Burns is probably my favorite play in the range, factoring in price. Homa's up there. But then after that, it's Mr. Tommy Fleetwood for me. I don't know if there's a guy. I got him at 55 to 1. Yeah, 55 to 1 betting. There's a good chance I haven't built my lineup yet. I'm probably fucking building it like on stream right now. Like Fleetwood and Burns, there's a decent chance one of them, I don't think both, one of them probably makes that lineup. But the way that Fleetwood is playing, he should be $8,800. Like very quietly, the irons have come back. You know the putter is going to be there. It's really just the ball striking and how that's been looking. And the ball striking has looked good. He got the top 10 finish last week. He started to gain like 4 strokes with the approach play, which is something that all of last year since the restart, nothing. There's like no pulse out of Tommy Fleetwood with the irons. I would try and play the guy. He would get down to like 7,500 in one event. And it was like, oh, we got to play this guy. Loses like 6 strokes with the irons. But now he's gained in 3 straight events. He's gained tee to green. The most that he's gained in over a year last week was at the Arnold Palmer. He gained 5.4 strokes tee to green on the PJ Tour. He's played some overseas, so could have done better. But yeah, Fleetwood is somebody that I think is a strong play. I'm actually surprised that I just think that how bad of a stink he's had for like the last 6 months, people aren't realizing these last couple of weeks. So that's why the ownership is staying low with him in the 7K range. I was surprised to see that. So I would say that for me, he's probably a priority this week as well.
Yeah, I love my guy Tommy Fleetwood. You got to say it in the British accent because
I saw your tweet about that. I watched it. I watched it twice because I thought it was funny.
Yeah, but
that again.
Tommy Fleetwood, I actually love this guy. He's one of my favorite guys on tour, and it's great to see him finally playing well. I'm definitely going to play him. The ownership maybe like a little bit higher than some other guys, just because it is coming back. I don't know what you have him in ownership. Fantasy National has him at 11.7. A lot of guys that you find on this course, one thing we haven't mentioned it a ton, but a lot of guys, it's hard to find guys who have like a consistent course history here. Everyone's pretty much all over the place. That's because of the randomness of the course. Fleetwood has I believe it's tied 5th and tied 7th in his last 2 here. So he has played well here. The irons are really heating up. So I do like Fleetwood a lot this week. And one other guy I want to mention that's right below him is Louis Oosthuizen at 7,800. Another guy who's just quietly playing lights out. No one really realizes it. Not going to come in high owns. His short game is unbelievable, ranks 1st in putting. I see Louis is playing well this week. This guy, if you look at his putting splits, like they're absolutely ridiculous, like every single week. Obviously, it's a little bit scary when a guy's like that, because like, yeah, he could have one bad putting week and then he's probably screwed. But I mean, the last few rounds, 4.5 putting, 4.3, 7, 1.8, 1.3, 1.7, 6.2. Like he always gains putting, and the rest of his game is pretty solid as well. Like off the tee, solid. He's gained in 3 straight events. Approach has been kind of shaky, but around the green is great also. So if he could like net 0 on approach or like gain like 1 or 2, then he's probably gonna have a great week because the short game is there. Off the tee is fine. So I like Louis a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game with Louis. Like literally every single week, the guy will be good with the putter. It's just, what does he do with his irons? Does he show up in general? It's guys like, there's so many guys like that, whether it's like Brendan Todd, he can put the lights out, Kevin Na, like all these guys, do they do anything with the irons? And maybe this is a track that can set up well for that. Instead of like diving just down into like the loaded, just plentiful 6K range, I think we could take questions mainly. So like if anybody has any questions on any range, 6K range as well, you can let us know right now. But there's some questions coming in on the 6K range. I think that's probably a better way to approach that range because it's the same shit every week. There's like a couple of guys who stand out, and then it's like just try whatever you want at this point. But yeah, so we got a question on that range. We have Munoz. So how do I feel about Munoz? I could start on this one. So Mr. Sebastian, for me, I mean, there's a couple of things with Munoz that I would say got me encouraged by him, and it was he closed sucking. Like last week, I think he lost like 2.2 strokes on approach in that final round, and he still gained 3.1 strokes on the field at the Arnold Palmer. So back-to-back rounds, even if he just had like a net neutral round, he would have gained close to 5.5 strokes with his approach. So his approach has actually come back, which is not something that we've seen basically all season long. The putter has been like the big thing. It's just absolutely broken, but we can start to put him in this category where, okay, if we can just get good ball striking, right? Good tee to green, good off the tee. And then that approach, which we've gotten these last couple of weeks, just don't go absolutely catastrophic with the putter. And with the price point that he's in, really just make a cut, and then we know he can score after that. So I'm back in on Sebastian Munoz. I don't know if I have to get to him, though, is the thing. Like in general, for me, like in my priority lineup, like if I like max out all the single entries with my single entry lineup and I get down, let's just say in that lineup is making up like 50% of my exposure this week or 33%. I don't think I'm going to touch the 6K range as of right now, just because of how big the 7K range is and how we've been talking about really starting in we can talk more on lineup construction in a second, but starting in that 9 and 8K range. So I like Munoz. He's clearly like the top of that 6K range. So it's kind of like talking about the 7K range, but yeah, Munoz is somebody who would stand out for me in that range. in that range, you're not going to have ownership concerns, but I have Munoz currently at 1%, 0.7% owned, and I have him projected for 54.5 points. It's hard to judge him in that range, but he's my 33rd overall ranked guy, which means he will definitely be making a player pool for me for 150s. Any thoughts on Munoz?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the approach is encouraging. Last 2 tournaments, I'm not generally huge on him just because the putter is so bad. I honestly though, if I am definitely going to dip into the 6K range, the upper 6K range, I think has a lot of gems in there. Munoz will probably not be one of them, honestly. I think they're just guys that I like better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So we got Scott in the chat. He's asking about Landry just in terms of the win upside, because I mean, Landry's just somebody that's known. I mean, he's kind of like, I'm trying to think. I can't think of the golfer I'm thinking of who's like always down in these ranges, never does anything, but like there's always just the narrative that he can actually win an event. I can't think of the name right now, but Landry is one of those guys where, I mean, he'll pop off for like a top 20, maybe a top 5 once every couple of months. I have no interest in Landry. I get it though, because he's only $6,100. But no interest there. The last time that we saw him at Genesis, he did look good, but that's going to happen once every 2 months, in my opinion. No interest in Landry. Honestly, like the cheapest that I kind of go down here with any sort of overwhelming, I guess I'll let you get your take in on Landry, or anybody, let's just say that's like $6,200 and below if anything stands out there. I do think there's a couple of interesting options, but Landry won't be it for me.
Yeah, I'm not going to Landry either. No particular reason other than like there's just nothing that's that encouraging. Like, yeah, I get he's like a common name and stuff, maybe a little bit underpriced, but not going to go to him. The lowest I'd probably go is Doug Gim at 6'2". But I mean, honestly, like everyone seems to be catching on to that. I saw Fantasy National has him at like 5% owned, which is pretty high for, obviously it doesn't matter. 5% is not significant, but it's significant when the guy is priced 6'2", in my opinion. So yeah, maybe I get to him. He's played really well. I think he's very underpriced. But when I look at the 6K range, I'm mostly looking at the mid to upper. I don't think I'm going to get below 6'5".
Yeah, I agree. I would say that
maybe not even below 6'7", but I think if you want to talk about that now, I think there are a few guys at 6'7", 6'8" that I really like.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, Landry not for me. Gim, I would back that at 6,200. If you wanted to go just flat min for whatever reason you needed it, I think that down there, Cameron Piercy is probably your best option just in terms of where the irons have been lately. I agree consistent. Yeah, and just consistent in that regard. But yeah, we can talk about that, or you can just go with that 6.7 range and the guys that you like there. But some people are just basically saying Chris Kirk, he's been great. Chris Kirk at 7K over the 6K options. I personally will take Munoz over Chris Kirk, but outside of that, I do like Kirk this week. He's a yes for me right now.
Yeah, I had Kirk last week. I really like him. I think he's probably going to come in with a little bit of ownership, though. I would think, just since the guy's playing so well lately. Yeah,
I have him at 11.6%, which is a lot for that range.
Fantasy National has him 11.4. So at that point, I don't know if at that point I may just drop down to these guys I'm going to talk about right now in 6'8", 6'7". I'll name a few here, and honestly, we could talk about bets after this, but I have some bets on a lot of these guys as well because I think there's some value here. I think Keegan Bradley's a little bit interesting at 6,900. But he also is looking like he's going to come in with a lot of ownership, so I'll probably stay away from him. Also, this is interesting. Keegan Bradley actually gained strokes putting last week, so immediately abort him for this week. That's my thought. But yeah, I mean, probably a decent option, all jokes aside. But if he comes in with the ownership, I'm going to jump down to guys in the 6'8" range, 6'7" range. We got Ryan Moore, a guy who I love this week. Ryan Moore comes 31st in my model, and if you look at his last few tournaments, he's missed the cut in 4 of his last 5 events. But the last event he played, Pebble Beach AT&T Pro-Am, he was pretty good, finished 26th. But look, the fact that the guy has missed 4 out of his last 5 cuts still comes in at 31st in my model. There's clearly something with the course that matches up with him. Now, here's what it is. So I put in my model, I weighted fairways gained. He ranks 4th in that category. He ranks 1st in proximity 125 to 150. Obviously, I mentioned that's the second most common approach shot here. Those two things are huge in my opinion. Now, he has played this course a lot. He finished top 30 his last two times here. He was I believe tied 20th and then tied 30th. Approach is generally really good greens and regulation player. I like Ryan Moore a lot. He's not going to come in high owned, and I think he's coming in. Fantasy National has him like 3.5%, which is great. So yeah, Ryan Moore I like. I'm also betting him to finish top 30 at plus 500. I think there's some nice value there. Also, another guy in this range, Kevin Streelman. Streelman, and there's a lot of guys like this. Down here, I'm pretty much targeting the guys who are going to hit the fairways and guys who are going to get there in regulation. I think that's important. Streelman ranks 25th in my model, 14th in fairways gained, 11th greens in regulation, 12th in proximity 125 to 150, 29th in proximity 100 to 125. And then I'll let you, before I have a few more guys, but don't want to ramble on too long here. What are your thoughts on Streelman, Moore?
Yeah, so I would say Moore does look appealing, but I don't normally get there. Like, I guess guys that I end up getting to more, whether it's like basically like Henrik Norlanders, the Varners, the Matthew Naismiths, all at 6,700. That's probably where I would go to more, but I'm just going to lean towards Munoz at that point. There's not much. Those guys are enticing for the reasons of you hope they putt and they're going to have their irons. Like, that's about it right now. Some of them are struggling, so you're getting a price discount, like Varner struggling the last couple of weeks. And for the most part this season. But that's kind of like where I'm at on this range. I would say that Johnny Vegas is an interesting wild card down here. He projects out well for me, but that's because, last 50 rounds, he's been good. We just don't see him all that often. We've only seen him twice on tour so far this year. I think we've only seen him like a handful of times, 6 times over the last 6 months in general. So somebody that projects out well down in this range, but you have to keep in mind that that's kind of skewed to an extent because we don't get to see him as often. So it might only be like 12 events over the last year that's really waiting in. A couple of good events can skew it. So yeah, that's kind of it, like in this range for me. I saw a question from Mr. Stutter Story had a good question about just overall lineup construction wise and running in an optimizer. You have 150 lineups he wants to run this week. He wants to be aggressive. How many players should I have in a player pool? Love your work. So this can get really in the weeds, I guess, in depth you can get here. If I run 150 lineups and use 2 or 3 uniques, basically I'll normally get like 80 to 90 players. And that might sound like a lot in a 150 person field, but that's just the reality of it. It's going to start to filter through a lot of value, especially this week where there's a lot of nice, 6, 7K guys. It's just going to filter through. So you'll get 80 or 90. If you're trying to be aggressive, does that mean you're locking in a golfer? Does that mean you're getting like 60, 70% of 1 or 2 guys? Then it's going to start to get lower. So if you're getting, let's just say, if you're locking in a guy, yeah, like you can run 40 or 50 guys in a player pool. You're just going to have a high percentage of a couple of them. If you're okay riding like all your chips that Jordan Spieth makes the cut and plays well and things like that, then that's completely fine. So I like playing aggressive usually. Most of the times I'll have like 80 guys in a player pool, which that's kind of considered aggressive for like a lot of pros. A lot of pros run like around 90 to 100. But guys do get aggressive. I'd say 40 or 50 if you're trying to get like really aggressive. I'm just looking if there's any other questions here. Joseph says he's going to play Louis because, yeah, he WD'd last week. I don't think there's anything there in terms of injury concern for him moving forward this week. And then Scott asks about Hoffman. Hoffman's just like another guy for me. I know that he had the really hot, I think it was Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. He had like just 7 or 8 birdies in the round in general. He's just another guy that doesn't really do much at 6,800 this week. By Streelman, by Woodland, I have Hoffman right now for 3%. I probably just play Streelman at 1% projected ownership right now, but I'll let you finish up on that 6K range. We got 100 plus people right now currently watching live on a 150 on a Wednesday afternoon. So I appreciate everybody in here. Like, subscribe, do those things. Check out Dylan's channel, Dylan's Patreon, all that stuff. You can find it out. I'll link it down below at the end of this stream. You can check out the Patreon tools, projections, rankings that we have. A brand new optimizer that came 10 days ago, starting in March. We had a Patreon reach out. He said, I got this cool optimizer. We looked at it. There's actually some nice things you can do with it with rules, uniques, and randomness. So you can check that out down below if you would like to. I'll drop the link into the chat as Mr. Sportsbird himself, the amateur golfer that's already tested out the Florida Keys, the Florida Greens, the Florida courses for us, finishes up the 6K range. What you got, fella?
Yeah, love to see all the people watching. I did a DFS video and betting video on my channel, Sportsbird, this week, so go check that out. Now, to finish the 6K range here, Scott mentions Hoffman. Look, he ranks out decently, so I'm fine with him. But there are other guys I'm looking at here, specifically the 2 guys that I mentioned in the 6K range already, Moore and Streelman. But then I want to drop to this to 6-7 here. Neesmith looks like he could be a solid play. I believe he missed the cut in last week, but he's been really good with the irons, so I like him. But 2 guys I like a little bit more than even Neesmith here. Brennan Steele, 27th in my model. Just a guy who's going to, again, like Streelman. I always get confused with Steele and Streelman because 1, their names are similar, and 2, their games are similar. You got
that's Brendan Grace and Brendan Steele for me. Like you
get Steele, so they're almost like identical in terms of fairways gained and greens and regulations gained. Both of them like are going to do that. So considering, and also Steele finished tied 6th here a couple of years ago, so he has had success here. And again, yeah, just 13th in fairways gained, 18th in greens and regulation, 20th in proximity, 200 plus. And he has been playing well. I believe he's, made the cut in like his last 6 events. So I think he's a pretty safe option with some upside as well. And now Henrik Norlander coming in with pretty low ownership, 5% on Fantasy National, ranks 8th in my model. And look, he hasn't been great the last few weeks, or I think at least, let me just double check this. I believe it was either last tournament or the last 2 tournaments. And he had it. Yeah. So last week at Arnold Palmer, he finished 71st. Genesis, he missed the cut. Those were his last 2 tournaments. The Arnold Palmer, and Norlander's never great with the putter. That's probably what holds him back. But he lost 8.6 strokes putting at the Arnold Palmer. Is that going to happen again? If he gets up to -3 strokes putting instead of -8.6, what does he finish? Probably top 30, honestly. Like that's the way you got to look at it. It's a complete outlier there. As a result, he gets pushed down to 6-7 here. But the guy is ranked 8th in my model for a reason. His approach is locked in. 12th in strokes gained approach, 9th in ball striking, 15th off the tee, 10th in green regulations gained, 10th proximity 125 to 150 over his last 24 rounds. So I really like Norlander, Steele, Neesmith, Moore, and Streelman from this 6-7, 6-8 range. And then, one more guy I'm gonna mention here. And this is a complete dart throw. May throw him in one lineup, may not. I was huge over this past summer on Ches Reavie. He was playing great golf. He always hits fairways, and I think that's a reason why I'm kind of big on him this week, because like you would think a guy who hits fairways, pretty solid with the irons usually, like that's his course. Like if he's sound with the driver like he normally is this week, then I think he could make a cut and potentially have some upside. So maybe probably other than I mentioned Doug Gim, but other than that, probably the lowest I get is Ches Reavie.
I think that's fair. Reavie's the guy that somebody bet like, what was it, like 20K or some shit on when he was like plus 300 to win the event, missed the cut. It was like 10 times in a row he missed the cut.
He was so good over the summer. I was playing him in like everything, and then he got to the PGA Championship and just lost everything.
Yeah, we can finish up so I'll list off the outrights I have right now, just kind of if people don't follow me on Twitter or just haven't seen them on Twitter, we can list off the outrights there. And then we can basically just take questions for like the final, really until the questions are answered. But right now, so I got most of these on Monday, but then I added Homa on yesterday. So I got outrights only. I don't have any top 20s yet. Head-to-heads are stuff that I usually add probably tonight. JT 21, Hatton 35 to 1, Fleetwood 50 to 1, Casey 55 to 1, which I didn't even have interest in betting Casey. Didn't really talk about him today, but I like him. Just that number was too good. I thought he was going to be like 40 to 1. And Burns 125 to 1. Added yesterday Homa at 110 to 1. Do you have any bets placed and or planning to bet any?
Yeah, so honestly, like I saw your list early in the week before I was able to look at anything, and 3 of them stood out to me. So I'm riding with you there with JT at 20 to 1, Hatton 35 to 1, and Burns you could get it at 160 to 1 on FanDuel. I'm still good betting at 125 to 1. I think 125 to 1 is great value. You get it to 160 to 1, it hits a whole new level. Then also 2 additional guys I like for outrights: Webb Simpson 22 to 1. Matsuyama, I don't know why, but I have a little bit of a gut feeling with him, so 40 to 1 there. And then I saw some value with a lot of the guys I just spoke about with this 6K range. On FanDuel, there was not a huge differential between the top 20 odds and top 30 odds. And I feel like obviously there should be a significant drop off in odds. You shouldn't get as good value. And like if you looked at DraftKings, a guy like Ryan Moore, for him to place top 30, it was like plus 300 or something. If you looked at FanDuel, him to finish top 30 was plus 500. So if you have access to FanDuel, you could look at Ryan Moore plus 500, Norlander plus 440, all these to finish top 30. Brennan Steele plus 500, Streelman plus 480. Again, maybe on other platforms besides DraftKings and FanDuel, they have similar here to FanDuel, but I think those have pretty good value if you're just looking for some top 30 bets.
Yeah, and I'd encourage people. We got a new sponsor on the betting PGA show, Odds Checker. But I mean, you could use anyone that you want. Just the platforms that have Action Network has one. The platforms that basically have. I like the way that Odds Checker is just laid out user friendly wise. So you can check it out. It has like all the odds for every single sports book, so you can quickly find the best bet, assuming that you have access to at least multiple books. It's something that you should take the time to do. If you get a guy at 50 to 1 instead of 40 to 1, you bet $10 on it, you're making right there an extra $100 like it was nothing. And that's just one bet one time, not even counting the next year or 2 of your betting. So definitely something to do. So we can take some questions now. We have Alex asking about Sergio. Sergio's interesting. Course history for me, it's not really something that it'll wait like 5% or so for me here, but he's interesting just because of the price range he's in, but he's still picking up ownership. Like I have him at like 9% owned. So I'll take Homa in that range 10 out of 10 times as of right now at lower ownership, comparable ownership to Corey Connors and Russell Henley. I'll just take those guys instead. So honestly, for me, I don't expect to get Sergio. If I get him in like my 150s, if he's one of those 80 golfers in my player pool, I assume he'll be like a 3 or 4% owned guy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of just looked past Sergio this week. I know the course history is really good, former winner here, but I mean, if he's going to come in at 9% owned, then I don't even think it's worth it. Just go to Homa.
Yeah, that would be the thing if you wanted to try and find anything there. We have JT and Gim, so we have a this or that. So JT and Gim or Hatton in a high 7K range player. I'll go Hatton in a high 7K range. I'll personally go Hatton and Fleetwood over JT and Gim if I had to put a guy in there. Do you have any lean on this side of it?
Yeah, I agree with you. Hatton in a high 7. I love JT, but I think you're getting pretty risky if you want to go into the low 6 in a tournament like this, even if it's Doug Gim, who I think is significantly underpriced. So I would go with Hatton, and if you want to go Fleetwood, Stasin, Homa, any of the guys we talked about, I think that that's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, yes, the made cut equity you have to take into account, but then, like, if you're talking about the ceilings, JT has one of the highest ceilings in golf, sure, but Hatton's still a top 8 golfer in the world. He came in last week ranked 6. I don't know if he bumped down a spot. He's still a top borderline 6 ranked golfer in the world. Like, his ceiling is just as high as JT's ceiling, if not barely below it. So, yeah, then I'll take the Fleetwoods of the world over the Gims. But I think that's a good question to try and, like, take into account stars and scrubs versus balance. That's kind of the epitome of it right there. We have somebody saying 808 kicks in the chat. What's going on, man? Or girl? He says, 63 or she at $6,300. Nobody is talking about Mr. Andrew Putnam. Yeah, I actually think it's interesting here because you're seeing good course history lately. The problem is a lot of it's coming from the putter, and that's something that I won't jump back on top of. Sure, if you're down in this range, and it's the same thing we were talking about earlier in terms of why is Max Homa not picking up steam, maybe not ownership, but steam in his range. Guys around him are playing better lately. In this range, you have Doug Gim, who's been playing really great lately and being brought up in a lot of prominent podcasts in the industry. So Putnam at 6,300. Yeah, I mean, he's worth a nod. He's gained over 10 strokes in back-to-back events. But the problem is he's doing most of that with the putter. Showed a nice iron week at the Arnold Palmer. So, yeah, I mean, it's the same analysis as like a Doug Gim. If Putnam's going to be 1% on this week and Gim's going to be 5, I mean, just go to Putnam for a guy who's doing basically the same thing, getting it done with the irons lately, but mainly the putter.
Yeah. I was going to say I'm fine with Putnam. I honestly hadn't looked into him that much before this point. Has a lot of good finishes lately. One thing that would worry me with him is that his approach is not great. It's very all over the place. He gained 3.2 on it last week and as a result finished 4th. Then in Genesis, though, minus 3.2, and he kind of got away with it. Minus 3.8 at the Pro-Am, minus 1.1 at Amex. That's probably something that you're not going to get away with here. At the Players, and if his putting comes back down to earth, then I think that he could, I'm not huge on it, but if at 6.3, I think it's a fine option if you had to go that low.
Yeah, I agree. And then we just have one on Wernitzky. Not going to be the guy for me, honestly. Coming off of a T4 finish, made 5 straight cuts, and seems to be one of the less risky 6K range golfers. I'm honestly probably not going to. So the theory of Wernitzky, yes, looks good, but the actuality of me getting down this low to the $6,400 range in anything with priority is going to be a no. So if you see me win one of these big contests with Wernitzky in my lineup, it's just because he got into that 1 or 2% of my 150s. But me actively trying to get to any of him, he's not going to be somebody that I get to. And just the way that I'm building my lineups is going to probably be, and we can kind of end on this for lineup construction. I expect to get 1 to 2 9K range guys, Hatton, and then either Fleetwood or Sam Burns in that range, and really just finish up with 3 7K guys. So 3 7K guys, and then 2 between 8 and 9K.
Yeah, I'm not huge on Wernitzky, and honestly, I agree with you. The lineup construction probably going to be 2 or 3 9K guys for me, and then if I play 3 9K, then I'll get down to the 7K, and then possibly take a couple of my high 6K guys that I like, or I'll go a little bit more balanced, go 2 9s, Hatton or Matsuyama there, and then I guess hit a few 7K as well.
Yeah, I mean, he did look really good, I will say, at the Arnold Palmer. The other thing to keep in mind, though, for a lot of these guys down here is a lot of their finishes, like where they're finishing, let's just say 40th or 25th, like they're coming earlier in the year where the fields were nowhere near as loaded as they've been specifically this week, but also the last couple of weeks, WGC, the Genesis was a pretty nice field. So that's something else, like when you're looking at course history at like the Farmers and like the AMAX, like those fields were nothing as to what they were or are going to be this week. So I think we can close it out on that. This was the final picks, final bets, all that type of stuff. I'll add any betting card stuff to my Twitter. I believe the event starts, last time I checked, DraftKings locks at least at like 6:45 in the morning, somewhere around there. So be sure to check that stuff out. Be sure to check out the sponsor of the show, Prize Picks. I mean, basically, they're doing a promotion right now. So they're making every golfer be like an average golfer. So just go take Rory and take JT and just take the overs on those guys. If you want to use the code SAL to check it out, you can use that code and you'll get a 100% match up to $100 Rooski. So you put in 20, they'll give you 20. You want to put in 100, they'll give you 100 as well. Alrighty, cool. Thank you for tuning in. Like, subscribe before you go. You can follow Dylan over on Twitter at sports_bird, his YouTube channel as well. Anything else, Dylan, from you? Any final thoughts for this week?
Yeah, just not much. It's going to be tough with a lot of guys getting cut. Going to be tough. Low percentage of 6-6, but hopefully we have a big week this week.
There we go. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your week. Best of luck. Best of luck in whatever you're doing in the outright markets. Hopefully on Sunday, we could all be holding hands, eating our pasta Sunday, jumping up and down for one of the bets that we all have in who do we have together? Who are the three that you tailed? Burns, Fleetwood, I think.
JT, Haddon, and Burns.
All right, so let's all jump up and down for a big Burns bomb at 125-1 out there together. If you're watching in the chat right now, go place a bet on Mr. Samuel Burns at 100K plus somewhere. All right, everybody. Peace out. Appreciate you all tuning in. See you all in the next one. Same time, same place next week. Peace.
Yes, sir.